It was a really entertaining football game for about 16 minutes, and then the route was on. Ole Miss with a beautiful opening drive that went 11 plays and 75 yards, 4.5 minutes. Quinshon Judkins scored 2 touchdowns. They only counted one of them. The first one was 5 yards out, but they got one of those pesky flags for holding. And then he scored on the next play from 15 yards out to give Ole Miss a 7-0 lead. Georgia pretty quickly responded, though. DeJuan Edwards with a 1-yard rushing touchdown, 6 plays, 75 yards, made it 7-7. Then Georgia took a 14-7 lead when Ladd McConkey scored his first touchdown on a pass from Carson Beck. Quinshon Judkins with a 4-yard rushing touchdown with 14-16 to go in the second quarter to make it 14-14. But let's be real. Even as you watch that first quarter, you were having to ask yourself, is Ole Miss ever going to be able to get a stop? Because this looks really, really easy for Georgia. Mm-hmm. And you kind of were giving yourself the benefit of the doubt that Georgia was probably going to figure out some things. I didn't think that they were going to stop the Ole Miss offense for the remainder of the game. But the score went from 14-14 to 45-14 before Ole Miss kicked a field goal midway through the fourth quarter. And then Georgia added one more touchdown for good measure with 4 minutes to play to win 52-17. A couple of things stand out in terms of numbers. Kendall Milton rushed the ball 9 times for an average of 14.1 yards per carry. Healthy Kendall Milton is pretty good. Brock Bowers, still very, very impressive, as is a healthy Ladd McConkey. Carson Beck, is there anybody that throws a prettier ball in college football than Carson Beck? I mean, he was surgical. 18 of 25, 306 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had the one interception at the end of the first half of the ball game. Georgia rolls up 611 yards of offense on 61 plays. Quick math, it's 10 yards of play. 10 yards of play?
It was more than that until the game ended essentially early and, backups and third stringers played. And I mean, it was absolute, complete, and total physical domination. And people are doing Missouri only lost by 10, and so is Missouri really that much better than Ole Miss? And Ole Miss beat Vanderbilt by more than Georgia did. So does that mean Ole Miss is better than Georgia? No, it's ridiculous. But you saw a Georgia team at full strength. Bowers came back and played. First-round pick at tackle came back and played, and a running back for that matter as well on that offense. And a complete physical mismatch on the lines of scrimmage. And Georgia's receivers were uncoverable from Ole Miss's defensive backs. I was talking to you earlier about this, and I put it on Twitter, which is not a good place to put things like this during the emotions of a game, but I did it anyway. People both on that website and Kirk Herbstreit were saying things like, well, Ole Miss just needs to make adjustments on defense. They just need to adjust to what Georgia's doing. And I thought, what would you suggest
with about 16 players, there was not an adjustment to be made.
Yeah, what would you suggest they do, Kirk? Because they tried to go man, got burned. Tried to stack the box, got thrown on. Tried to do a lighter box to stop the pass, got ran on. Georgia just had significantly better players than Ole Miss and were as locked in, as engaged as they've been all season, and as healthy as they've been all season.
That's it. So you guys remember, I'm giving myself credit here. After the Kentucky game, after Georgia beat Kentucky, I said, guys, there's one thing that Ole Miss really should worry about more than anything else with this Georgia game. Because Georgia's played with its food a lot this year, right? They haven't been super impressive, and they've been banged up. But motivated Georgia hearing from national people throughout the week, them talking about their game, oh, is this the week? They could be in trouble. Not that anybody really picked Ole Miss to win that game on game day or anything like that. But all week long, those columns about, how can Ole Miss beat Georgia and, what's the recipe and this good Ole Miss offense. Georgia struggled with Ole Miss's tempo on the first 2 drives. They adjusted and they were done. And Ole Miss was down Micah Pettis, and we're down Jaden Williams after, 3 plays? Went down on the first drive. So Ole Miss was limited on the offensive line and just – so Georgia at night, for the first time really this year, they had a couple of night games, but not a night game like that. Motivated and healthier than they've been all season long, with a complete and 100% inability to put any pressure whatsoever on Carson Beck. That's a recipe for 52-17. Mm-hmm. And that's what you got. Carson Beck, in his post-game interview with Holly Rowe, she asked him about the offensive line. He's like, man, those guys, I'm not even dirty. The only dirt on me is a couple of times I slid so I wouldn't get hit at the end of a run. Yeah. Not only was he not sacked, not only was he not hit, he was not pressured the entire game. Not once.
No.
Ole Miss had one pass breakup. That was DeAndre Prince. They had the interception right before the half. 0 sacks, 0 tackles for loss, no forced fumbles. The interception came from Dejon Anthony. That pass breakup by Prince was a good one.
Mm-hmm. Saved a touchdown right before the half.
The Dayton Wade catch on the throw from Spencer Sanders was like a combination of Gumby and Superman, with maybe a little Inspector Gadget mixed in, Go-Go Gadget arms.
It was something.
There's your difference, though.
So, and the graphic that they put up where they showed the 4 and 5 stars, and the point that they made in the broadcast where they said, look, Ole Miss has got 18 4 and 5 star players on the roster, and that's a really respectable number. And Georgia had 42. There are 4 rosters in the country that look like that. Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State. Who's the 4th?
Hell, Michigan doesn't even have that right now.
Maybe A&M.
Before the mass exodus. But there's your difference. That is the difference between the gold standard of the sport that hasn't lost at home in 5 years. It's won the last 2 national championships. That's recruiting at a level nobody's ever seen before on an annual basis. In a program that is most certainly having success in building and very respectable and good, and they'll be in the top 15 still after this week. That's your difference, though. There is your difference between the two. You saw it on the lines of scrimmage, most especially. I think that some of the reaction to that outcome was a bit ridiculous in terms of expecting to go into that situation and beat that Georgia team. I find they could have played better, certainly, especially defensively. There were tackles to be made that they missed. Jackson Dart had a bad interception before the half, stuff like that. And so they could have played better. But the people that were angry about that outcome, I can't wrap my mind around that at all, frankly. You're not there yet, and that's okay.
The only thing that changed for Ole Miss with that loss, assuming, and this is, you got to play the games, assuming they beat ULM this week and they win against Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl and finish 10-2, the only potential thing that changed is Missouri is going to be ranked higher than they are in the college football playoff poll, possibly knocking them out of an access bowl, possibly.
Yeah, the resume right now, if you really break it down, Ole Miss's is better than Missouri's.
How's the committee going to do that? We'll have to wait and see. Missouri's been better at the end of the year, or they don't have that late loss. So we'll see how it plays out. Right now, 2 more wins for Ole Miss, and the floor in terms of bowl games is the Citrus Bowl in Orlando. That's the floor.
And you'd play Iowa probably.
I think you would like your chances.
You would love your chances. And that would be, should you win that game, the first 11-win season ever. That's kind of – I spent the weekend on Twitter. I'm going to spend less time on that website because I couldn't wrap my mind around some of the reactions from people criticizing Lane Kiffin for not being able to win that game, which is just astronomically stupid. They are still favored to win 10 games in regular season for the second time ever in the history of the program, each of them coming the last 3 years. Losing to Georgia, even the manner in which they lost to Georgia, does not change the fact that you are possibly going to have a historic season. I don't know. I found the discourse around that game in particular to be bizarre, both from Ole Miss fans and then national college football people. Really didn't make sense to me.
Somebody said, imagine getting Ole Miss versus USC in a bowl game. That'd be fun.
Caleb Williams wouldn't play, though.
Caleb Williams would not play, and I think you would really like Ole Miss's chances in that game. Somebody said to define an Access Bowl. It's the 6 bowl games: the Peach, the Sugar Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, the Rose Bowl, the Orange Bowl, and the Cotton Bowl. 2 of those each year have a playoff game. The other 4 are the at-large game. 5. Here's the truth of the matter with Ole Miss. We all made predictions going into the year. Hey, Dad had Ole Miss at 7-5. Is that right? 6-6 or 7-5?
7-5.
I think I had Ole Miss. I think my official number was 8-4 with a reasonable chance at 9-3. I think Borky was in that neighborhood also, right there around 8-4. I think probably Mike in Oxford had Ole Miss 10-2 or 11-1. Maybe he had them 12-0. I don't know. There were a few extremely optimistic Ole Miss fans that had them with 10 wins this season. But when most people looked at Ole Miss's schedule this year, they said, well, you go to Alabama and you go to Athens, so start your prediction with 2 losses and then go from there. Assuming no upset over the final 2 weekends of the regular season, Ole Miss is going to finish 10-2. It will be their second 10-win regular season in school history and their second 10-win regular season in the last 3 years. Ole Miss will be in line for either their 4th Access Bowl in 10 years or their first ever trip to the Citrus Bowl. And I don't think you can find an Ole Miss fan outside maybe the just most ardent, it's got to be perfect, that before this season began would have not signed off on 10-2 with 2 losses on the road to Alabama and Georgia. I think everybody else would have been like, okay, I'll take it.
Would have been more than I'll take it. When we talked about this, I mean, how many responses? Yeah, 8-4, it's fine. A lot of turnover, new coordinator. We'll take 8-4.
So, if there is no upset, that's a big if, right? You got to play the 2 games. I mean, Ole Miss can beat ULM. I said I don't even think I was being hyperbolic when I said this. Jane and I were talking about the ULM game this weekend. I said Ole Miss could win that game if I played quarterback on Saturday. Now, you would have to adjust the game plan from what they're going to do just a little bit, but I could stand in the shotgun and go, hut, and turn it and hand it off 45 times and maybe throw 4 or 5 passes and lead Ole Miss to a win over ULM. You got to play in the Egg Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
That is a game that Ole Miss, I think Hey Dad will agree with this. It's a game that Ole Miss should win. Like, there are no ifs, ands, and buts. This year, that is a game that Ole Miss 100% should win.
No question.
They'll be close to 3 touchdown favorites, probably.
Yeah.
17-20.
And if Ole Miss starts fast in that game, it has a chance to get away. If it's kind of a slow, clunky start and Mississippi State hangs around, then you start playing with some momentum and some pride, and, weird things happen. But as it stands right here today, based on the seasons that they've had, Ole Miss should win that football game. In which case, they would finish 10-2. With likely continuity on the coaching staff, momentum in recruiting, and as long as you don't end up with some off-the-field distraction about where Lane Kiffin's name is popping up for jobs all over the place, like a ton of fan base momentum. I think that's the only thing at this point that could turn Ole Miss fans off on the season 2023. And yes, I know that there are people that are throwing Lane Kiffin's name on hot boards for Texas A&M. I don't get the impression that Texas A&M has much interest in doing that. I know some of that is like Billy Lucci beating that drum. I think Billy Lucci doesn't like Lane Kiffin.
I have heard though that Kiffin will be in Starkville next Thursday, so just keep an eye on that.
It is an open job.
He has not denied interest in Mississippi State.
I mean, it would certainly signify a significant change in Mississippi State's spending habits if Lane Kiffin becomes the next head coach at Mississippi State.
Said go big.
But yeah, and to your point initially, because I had people say to me last night, this is just like the Auburn thing all over again, and I said no. When Auburn fired Brian Harsin, all eyes were directly pointed to Oxford, including Auburn's. But that was a thing right away. That is not, he showed up on a couple of hot boards, but that is not the feeling, at least as of today, at all around A&M.
I'm not sure what to do with this message on the C Spire text line. Kiffin has peaked. He will never do any better in Oxford. I'm not sure I follow your thought process there. If Ole Miss finishes this season 11-2, and Jackson Dart comes back and Quinshon Judkins comes back, and they have a reasonably good recruiting / portal, Ole Miss is going to be picked to be a playoff team next year in the first year of the 12-team playoff. I don't understand. On the C Spire text line, question, guys, why is the narrative that Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin or Mississippi State / whoever the coach is can't recruit big players and win national championships? We got to quit pushing this mindset. If you have the money and resources, then it shouldn't be hard. Lane Kiffin evidently loved the way Oxford looked, etc. Once we get you to see the campus, it's hard to say no. State can do the same if fans will pony up. Brad, it's really hard because you're not operating in a vacuum. And the fact of the matter is that you got to have a roster that's dominant at basically every position on the field. And while Ole Miss or Mississippi State can get elite players at multiple positions, it's really hard to do that at every position on the field and have the depth that you need. As evidenced on Saturday night by, a couple of pretty key injuries on the offensive line really affected Ole Miss's ability to run the offense that they wanted to run against a dominant Georgia defense. And look, the playoff situation changes next year. And you're going to have 12 teams that get into the playoff. And, Brad, if you can get into the playoff, then you got a chance. You've got to be playing your best football. You've got to be healthy. You've got to catch some breaks. And you probably got to have a little luck mixed in. And you hope that that's enough. Georgia had a little luck last year.
No doubt.
In their semifinal win over Ohio State, there was some luck there for Georgia. And then when Georgia played TCU in the championship game, you saw the physical difference. It wasn't close. TCU was not 100% healthy. Their best running back was out. Had a couple of other guys banged up. But if you didn't look at those two teams on the field and see the difference, and so to your point about if you spend the money if you have the money and the resources, then it shouldn't be hard. The money and the resources, simply put, don't exist at the same level at Ole Miss and Mississippi State that they do with some other programs. And it's not a shot, and it's not a defeatist attitude, and it's not a loser's attitude. It's reality. And it's reality based simply on numbers, like numbers of living alumni. Texas A&M has 50,000 students and like 500,000 living alumni. Georgia's enrollment is what, 35,000? And Athens sits 70 minutes, 90 minutes, depending on traffic, from a city that has 3 Fortune 100 companies. And that doesn't mean that Delta and Coke and Home Depot are giving money directly to Georgia. Here's what that means. You have corporate executives, lots of them, that are employed by those companies and lots of others that are very close and connected. There's just a deeper base of money available. And when you have more people with more money, then odds are you're going to have more money that goes to your collective and more money that goes into your program overall. Nobody's doing the little old Ole Miss, little old Mississippi State thing around here. Both programs have proven independently that they can compete at the highest level of football, but you can't just do it on one Saturday. You have to do that 5 Saturdays in the regular season, and then you're going to have to do it 3 times in the postseason. I mean, you got 4 non-conference games that you should probably win and 3 SEC games that you feel like most years you're going to be able to win. But if you're going to beat, based on the current divisions, LSU, Auburn, Texas A&M, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, on a regular basis, you got to have your big boy pants on 5 or 6 Saturdays out of the year in the regular season, and then 3 times in the playoff. And it's hard to do that over and over and over and over and always be healthy and always play your best and always limit mistakes. And, oh, by the way, account for the other team as well, who has all of those same things and probably more of them than you do. It's not a little old Mississippi thing. That's out the window. That is a bygone era. Yeah. But there are 5 teams in the country that are different than everybody else. Not different than Ole Miss and Mississippi State, different than everybody else.
Mm-hmm. And that's why measuring this Ole Miss team in particular, in Lane Kiffin, to the gold standard of college football, winner of 2 most recent national champions, all that, and then his other losses to Nick Saban, the greatest college football coach to ever live. That is the standard in which they are being measured. And, and here's the thing, because we've got a lot of texts about he's breached his ceiling, and I've seen people, national guys, say that elsewhere. Ole Miss football, with or without Lane Kiffin, has changed itself in the last 4 years. Financial commitment is very, very different. Hell, the facilities are even different. I mean, there's been a $40 million facility project, but financial commitment and fan buy-in and fan commitment has changed dramatically in just 4 years. They're building, positively building. It's just not going to happen as fast or have the same peak that Georgia does or whatever, but the job itself has changed in 4 years. It is better now than it was in 2019, 100%. It's not debatable. It is more attractive. It's more lucrative. It is more capable of being competitive today than it was then. I mean, even Dabo at Clemson, and Clemson was in better shape when he took over than what Ole Miss was at the end of 2019 when Kiffin took over. It took him 4 years to go to the Orange Bowl. They lost 2 conference games that year. We're talking about Dabo, who's won 2 national championships. What was it, 12 consecutive years of 11 wins or better or something like that. Just crazy record. It took him years to start doing that at Clemson in an easier conference with more inherent resources. So I think when you say that there's a ceiling, There is one that is lower than Alabama and Georgia and LSU, of course. But what the people at the institution are doing is raising that ceiling. It has changed in 2023 versus 2019. The ceiling of the program has absolutely, undoubtedly, undeniably changed.
Yep, agree with all that. And divisions are going away as well. Jeremy in Columbia says, well put, never looked at the money side and collective side of the dominant college football teams like that. Learned something today.
I mean, Ohio State, I know they're not in the SEC, but that is a high-populated state, right? I mean, it's a huge political battleground state for a reason. A lot of votes there. You have Cleveland, you have Columbus, which is a big city, and Cincinnati. You have three big cities. It sits on a lake, and there's a lot of economics that go with Lake Erie as well. It is a very wealthy state, and it's a really talent-rich state. And Ohio State owns the entire state. They inherently have
Toledo
advantages.
would like a word.
Toledo's closer to Michigan than it is Ohio State. But that's what Illinois is having to compete with, for example. But you don't have that in Mississippi. You don't have three big cities here. You don't have one. Memphis is the biggest city in Mississippi, and it's a few miles north of the border. Yeah. Alabama's what, hour and a half from Starkville? 80 miles, 90 miles? I mean, our friends on the Mississippi Gulf Coast are far closer to Baton Rouge and LSU than they are Oxford. It's different here. You have to be more efficient. You have to overcome more things than a place like a Georgia or an Ohio State or an LSU. It's different.
We get a message that says it will fall off tomorrow if Kiffin leaves. Sorry, but that's the truth. You might be right. I mean, Lane Kiffin is the...
Hugh Freeze went to 2 Access Bowls.
Lane Kiffin's the... am I going to say this? Is this true? Is he the second most successful coach at Ole Miss since John Vaught?
Probably the most at this point since Vaught.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I meant the second most successful overall. I may not have said that the right way. You might be right. I mean, if Ole Miss finds itself having to find a new football coach, then that will be a critical hire. But they don't have to